This is Ethiopia, one of the oldest countries on Earth, where people have lived for thousands of years among rugged highlands, arid landscapes, and some of the harshest environments in Africa. In many regions, daily life still depends directly on the land, the rainy season, and water supplies that can change after just a single drought. Yet more than 120 million people continue to build their lives across this country, maintaining dozens of languages, long-established communities, and traditions that have survived through countless generations. Even more remarkably, Ethiopia does more than preserve an ancient civilization in the modern world. It is also a place where history, religion, architecture, and the way people organize their daily lives carry characteristics that are very different from much of the rest of the world. So, how do Ethiopians actually live in one of the oldest countries on the planet, and what continues to keep them connected to the land that has shaped their lives? Located in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia is a landlocked country. But travel just a few hundred kilometers within its borders, and the landscape, climate, and even the way people live can change almost completely. Most of the population is concentrated across the vast highlands of the north and center, where mountain ranges, deep valleys, and farmland stretch across elevations thousands of meters above sea level. Even Addis Ababa sits at an elevation of more than 2,300 meters. This gives the capital a relatively cool climate and an urban rhythm completely different from the hot, dry lowlands of the northeast. Travel north from the capital, and the terrain rises even higher in the Simeon Mountains. Towering plateaus, deep gorges, and massive cliffs create one of Ethiopia's most spectacular and rugged landscapes. But head northeast, and everything changes again. The land suddenly drops into the Danakil Depression, one of the lowest, hottest, driest, and harshest regions in the country, with many areas located near or even below sea level. Running across Ethiopia is the Great Rift Valley, a massive geological system that has created a series of lakes, valleys, and volcanic regions stretching through large parts of the country. Farther south, the highlands gradually give way to plains and the Omo River basin. Here, the lives of many communities remain closely tied to livestock, water sources, and the changing rhythm of the seasons. The enormous differences in elevation, climate, and distance have led each region of Ethiopia to develop its own way of adapting. How people travel, farm, raise livestock, and make a living changes from one area to another. From the crowded streets of Addis Ababa and the cold peaks of the Simeon Mountains to the harsh Danakil region and the wide-open Omo Valley, Ethiopia has never had just one type of landscape. And for that very reason, there has never been just one way of life here. Before we continue exploring the wonders of Ethiopia, let us know which country you are watching this video from. Leave your answer in the comments below. Now sit back, relax, and continue the journey deeper into one of the most diverse and extraordinary regions of Africa. In northeastern Ethiopia, the Danakil Depression opens into one of the harshest regions on Earth. Temperatures can rise to extreme levels. The ground stretches across white salt flats, dark volcanic rock, and vast open spaces with almost no shade from trees. At Dalol, the landscape becomes even more unusual. Layers of minerals, saltwater pools, and geothermal springs create brilliant patches of yellow, green, and orange, making the area look more like the surface of an alien planet than part of Africa. But this surreal appearance is not the remnant of a past that has already ended. It is evidence of a geological process that is still taking place directly beneath people's feet. The Afar region lies where tectonic plates continue to pull away from one another. The Earth's crust is being stretched, magma rises from deep below, and volcanic activity continues to reshape the landscape. Not far from Dalol, Ale is one of the clearest examples. Smoke, heat, and lava rising from the ground show that Ethiopia does not simply carry the traces of a violent geological history. This land is still continuing to change. Yet just a few hundred kilometers to the west, the landscape is almost completely reversed. The Simien Mountains rise into highlands exceeding 4,000 meters, with sheer cliffs and a climate far colder than Danakil. In these isolated high mountain regions, Gelatus, Ethiopian wolves, and Walia ibex have adapted to an environment where very few species can survive. Farther south, the Great Rift Valley opens into another world. Large lakes, broad valleys, and fertile lands lie among volcanic formations, creating a geographic corridor that stretches across many regions of Ethiopia. And within these dramatic landscapes, the country also preserves an important part of the story of human origins. In the Afar region, the famous skeleton known as Lucy, along with many other archaeological discoveries, has provided important evidence about the distant ancestors of humans. Farther south, the Omo region has also become one of the most significant locations for the study of prehistoric humans. This is one of Ethiopia's greatest paradoxes. The same land can produce extreme temperatures, towering mountains, deep valleys, and distances that are difficult to cross, while also providing farmland, grazing areas, minerals, and water for millions of people. For thousands of years, the people here could not change the terrain they lived in. They had to learn how to adapt to it. And that adaptation has created very different ways of making a living, traveling, and organizing communities across Ethiopia. Across Ethiopia's highlands, a typical day often begins very early. As the first rays of sunlight appear over the hillsides, many families are already lighting fires, preparing breakfast, feeding livestock, and organizing the day's work. Some head to the fields, some open small shops, and others carry goods to market, while children get ready for school. In many rural communities, work is rarely the responsibility of just one person. Family members, relatives and neighbors often help one another during planting seasons, while caring for livestock, trading goods, or handling tasks that require many hands. As a result, daily life depends heavily on strong connections within the community. But once you leave the highlands, that rhythm changes noticeably. In the Omo Valley, the lives of many communities revolve around the river, livestock, and the transition between the rainy and dry seasons. Food supplies, places to live, and even the timing of movement can all change depending on natural conditions. Farther northeast, the Afar region presents an entirely different challenge. Extreme temperatures mean that many physically demanding jobs must begin before the sun rises too high, taking advantage of the early morning hours when the air is still cool enough for people and animals to move. Those differences are also clearly reflected in the places Ethiopians call home. From simple houses in the highlands and pastoral settlements in Omo and Afar to crowded neighborhoods in Addis Ababa, it is difficult to find a single model for daily life in this country. In the capital, mornings follow a completely different rhythm. Buses and minibuses line the streets. Crowds move toward offices, universities, shops, cafes, and construction sites. Smartphones, internet access, and modern services are also becoming an increasingly familiar part of life for younger generations. But Ethiopia is not simply divided into two worlds, one traditional and one modern. A person might use a smartphone for work and study in Addis Ababa, then return to their hometown a few days later to take part in a religious festival, help their family care for livestock, or sit with relatives during a ritual that has been maintained for generations. Old and new do not exist separately. They are woven together within the same family, the same community, and even within the life of the same person. And it is this overlap that shapes the rhythm of life in Ethiopia today. But behind every part of daily life, from heading to the fields before sunrise to opening a shop in Addis Ababa, there is still a more practical question. Across such different environments, how do Ethiopians actually make a living? Across much of Ethiopia, the livelihoods of millions of families still begin with the land they live on. In the highlands, fields of teff, wheat, barley, and many other grains stretch around villages. In areas with more suitable climates and elevations, coffee becomes one of the most important crops. Livestock also holds a special place in rural life. Animals provide food, labor, and income for families. For many people, a piece of farmland and a healthy herd of livestock form the foundation for both immediate food needs and long-term stability. But as you move into the Afar region, the way people make a living takes on a completely different form. While it is still dark, and before the heat becomes intense, salt miners have already begun their journey to the salt fields of Danakil. Using simple tools, they separate thick layers of salt from the ground, cut them into blocks, and load them onto camels, trucks, and other vehicles capable of crossing the harsh terrain. For generations, salt caravans have connected Danakil with markets and communities located hundreds of kilometers away. In one of Ethiopia's most difficult environments, the substance covering the ground in white becomes a source of income that supports many families. Farther south, in the Omo Valley and among pastoral communities, livestock carries meaning far beyond its economic value. The number of animals a person owns can be connected to marriage, status, family relationships, and their position within the community. For that reason, caring for livestock is not simply a way to make a living. It is also deeply tied to identity, tradition, and social structures that have existed for generations. Meanwhile, coffee connects rural Ethiopia directly with the rest of the world. From small farms, coffee cherries are harvested, processed, and transported to markets and processing facilities before entering a much larger trade network. A coffee bean that begins its journey in the Ethiopian highlands may eventually end up in a cafe in Addis Ababa or thousands of kilometers away. But in the capital and other major cities, the livelihood landscape is changing rapidly. Services, trade, construction, transportation, government institutions, and many forms of modern business are creating more and more employment opportunities. Every year, many young people leave their hometowns to study, find work, and build a new life in the city. However, whether income comes from a teff field in the highlands, a herd of livestock in Omo, blocks of salt in Danakil, or an office job in Addis Ababa, the livelihoods of Ethiopians remain difficult to separate from family and community. And to understand why these connections have remained so strong across generations, we need to look deeper at the forces that have shaped this country for centuries: identity, faith, and culture. Ethiopia does not have a single identity. Across the country, languages, clothing, food, and customs can change noticeably within just a few hundred kilometers, shaped by the geography, history, and beliefs of each community. Because of this, Ethiopia feels like many cultural worlds existing within a single border. In the north, Aksum clearly reflects this historical depth. Once the center of a powerful empire, the city still has massive stone stelae and ruins that recall a time when Ethiopia held an important position in ancient trade networks. According to Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, Aksum is also associated with the belief that the Ark of the Covenant is kept here. In Lalibela, churches carved directly into the rock hundreds of years ago are still in use today. Pilgrims wearing white robes walk through stone passageways to pray, while the Timkat festival turns faith into a community event with processions and thousands of participants. Farther north, reaching the Abuna Yamata Church in the mountains requires pilgrims to cross high cliffs. In the east, Harar has a different identity, with its old walled city, narrow alleys, markets, and dozens of mosques. After dark, men on the edge of the city call wild hyenas to them and feed them by hand. A practice that over generations has created a unique relationship between people and an animal often seen as a threat. Far to the south, the Omo Valley preserves different traditions. Among the Hamar people, the bull jumping ceremony marks an important transition into adulthood. In some Karo communities, body patterns, jewelry, and decorative styles reflect age, status, and identity. Livestock also plays a central role in livelihoods, marriage, rituals, and family relationships. From Aksum and Lalibela to Harar and the Omo Valley, Ethiopia's past does not sit quietly in museums. It remains present in prayers, festivals, clothing, rituals, and customs passed down through generations. And perhaps this sense of connection is easiest to see around a shared meal or a pot of coffee, where families and communities still make time to sit together every day. In many Ethiopian families, a meal begins with something that seems very simple, a layer of batter that has already been left to ferment. When the mixture is poured onto a hot surface, it gradually becomes injera, a soft, slightly spongy flatbread with a mildly sour taste that appears in most traditional meals. Injera is not only eaten as bread. It also becomes the base for what? Vegetables, beans, or meat placed directly on top, allowing several people to sit around a large, shared platter and eat together with their hands. This way of eating means that a meal in Ethiopia is rarely only about the food. It is also a time for families to sit together, talk, and maintain the relationships that play an important role in community life. This is even more clearly reflected in the coffee ceremony. Coffee beans are roasted on the spot until their aroma and smoke spread throughout the room. They are then ground, placed into a clay pot called a jabina, and slowly brewed before being poured into small cups over several rounds. The process can take time, but that time itself is an important part of the ceremony. Family members, neighbors, and guests sit together, exchange news, tell stories, and make time for conversations that would be difficult to have if everything were done in a hurry. Even markets are not only places to buy and sell food or goods. They are also places where people meet, exchange information, and maintain connections between villages and neighborhoods. But as Ethiopia becomes increasingly connected, these traditional gatherings are existing alongside a faster-moving world, where minibuses, smartphones, roads, and airplanes are changing how people travel and stay in touch with one another. In a country with terrain as varied as Ethiopia's, distance is measured not only in kilometers, but also in the time it takes to cross mountains, highlands, and remote rural areas. Roads remain the main connection between Addis Ababa, cities across the highlands, and thousands of smaller communities. Minibuses, buses, and taxis serve most transportation needs, carrying workers, students, goods, and agricultural products between residential areas and local markets. In Addis Ababa, the pace of life is noticeably faster. Crowded streets, minibuses weaving through traffic, the light rail system, and the flow of people heading to schools, offices, and commercial districts all reflect a capital city that continues to expand. From Addis Ababa Airport, Ethiopian Airlines connects the country with many domestic destinations and cities around the world. However, access remains uneven. In rugged regions or areas far from major roads, reaching a hospital, school, or large market can take many hours. As a result, the gap between urban and rural areas also comes down to how quickly people can access services and opportunities. Alongside expanding infrastructure, smartphones and the internet are creating a new form of connection. Young people use social media, mobile payments, and online platforms to communicate, do business, and search for opportunities. Education is also drawing more and more people from villages to towns and cities to study or work. But modernization does not mean that old habits disappear. A young person may wear jeans, use a smartphone, ride the light rail, or work in an office in Addis Ababa, then still return home for important occasions, take part in religious festivals, or sit with family during a coffee ceremony. In Ethiopia today, airplanes, smartphones, and modern vehicles still exist alongside traditional markets, caravans, and churches that are hundreds of years old. As the pace of change continues to accelerate, a major question emerges. How will these communities adapt to the pressures of climate, population growth, and urbanization in the future? The pace of change in Ethiopia is creating a growing number of increasingly visible challenges. In many rural areas, prolonged droughts and unpredictable rainfall are reducing crop yields, shrinking grazing land, and making it more difficult to maintain livestock herds. In dry regions such as Afar and eastern Ethiopia, water is not only essential for daily life, but also directly affects agriculture, livestock, and the survival of entire communities. At the same time, cities continue to expand. A large population and rapid urbanization are placing greater pressure on housing, transportation, employment, schools, and public services. Addis Ababa continues to grow, but the concentration of opportunities in urban areas is also causing many young people to leave their hometowns to study or find work. Over time, this could change the structure of rural communities as younger generations become less connected to traditional occupations. Change is also taking place in culture. The internet, social media, and global culture are exposing younger generations to new lifestyles faster than ever before, forcing some local languages, customs, and traditional skills to compete with an increasingly modern and uniform world. Nature is also under pressure. In the highlands, endemic species such as the Ethiopian wolf, gelada, and walia ibex depend on ecosystems that are already limited in size. As the population, farmland, and demand for resources continue to grow, protecting these habitats becomes increasingly difficult. Development is bringing Ethiopia more opportunities in education, transportation, technology, and employment. But it also raises a major question. As the country continues to move forward, how much of the way of life, languages, and traditions preserved across generations will still be able to survive? For many Ethiopians, home is not just a place where there is a house. It may be the land their family has farmed for generations, livestock that has been passed down, a familiar market, or the village where everyone has known each other since childhood. Land, therefore, carries more than economic value. It is also tied to memory, responsibility, and a sense of belonging. Extended families and communities also create a support network that is difficult to replace. When harvests are difficult, a family needs extra help, or an important event takes place, relatives and neighbors are often the first people to show up. Because of this, even when young people leave home to study or work in Addis Ababa, their connection to the place where they were born can still remain strong. Faith is another bond connecting generations. From the ancient churches of Lalibela to the mosques of Harar, from pilgrimages to major festivals, modern Ethiopians can still take part in rituals that their ancestors practiced hundreds of years ago. These connections also remain present in language, music, food, coffee ceremonies, festivals, and family customs. They can follow a person from a rural village to the city, or even beyond Ethiopia, without requiring them to remain in one place forever. Ethiopians grow up surrounded by churches, historic sites, traditions, and stories that show how their communities have endured for generations. Modernization brings more choices, and young people may study, work, or build lives elsewhere. But moving away does not mean giving up the place where they belong. Ethiopia is not a perfect place, and life still comes with many difficulties. But for many people, land, family, faith, memory, and a sense of belonging cannot easily be replaced by a more comfortable life. That is why many people still stay, while those who have left continue to look back toward the land they call home. From the Afar people among the salt fields, pilgrims in Lalibela, families living across the highlands, to younger generations in the fast-moving life of Addis Ababa, every region of Ethiopia has a very different way of life. But behind those differences are still common threads: land, community, faith, and a history preserved across thousands of years. So, what part of life in Ethiopia impressed you the most? And if you had the chance, would you be willing to live in a place like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to continue joining me on future journeys. See you next time.